Welcome to Art and Friendship, Cross-Cultural Dialogues and Practices. We are delighted to have artists Alexander Gorlizki from New York and Riyaz Uddin from Jaipur with us this evening, especially because their art practice is a celebration of this spirit of collaboration and cross-cultural connections that is integral to what MAP does. At MAP, we work towards the sharing of ideas, of people, of collections between institutions, because we believe that our collective energy and resources can provide a far richer experience for audiences. So let me very quickly introduce our guests. Alexander Gorlizki lives and works in Brooklyn, New York, where his studio is located. It's fascinating to see the way he brings together different visual languages and symbols along with the techniques of very skilled craftsmen, and then creates completely new narratives. Though Alex was trained as a sculptor, he is best known for his works on paper. Usually you will find that an artist is immersed in either the figurative or the abstract, but Alex seems to glide gracefully between the two, combining influences from textile patterns, magazines, photographs, pop culture, to create these fantastical scenarios. Riyaz Uddin is a master miniature painter who lives in Jaipur in the old quarter of the city. He began to study how to restore miniature paintings when he was just 15. Well, he turned out to be very skilled, and he soon went on to apprentice with two master miniature painters. So this early training gave him an excellent grounding in the different miniature schools and traditions, and also allowed him to become really versatile. He was able to establish his own studio at the grand old age of 18. Their detailed biographies are in the chat box, and that's where you can send in your questions to us as well, and we'll have some time for questions in this conversation. And so these two artists with different practices from two different corners of the world have spent the last 25 years creating some wonderful art together. Alex, the last time I spoke to you, you were in your studio in New York, and I could see this funky coat up in the corner. So why don't you paint a picture of your studio? Because I can see you're sitting somewhere else just now. And I've only read about these very evocative descriptions of it as some sort of alternate universe that seems to exude a kind of magic. So tell us about it.
Hi, Kamini. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to MAP for inviting me and Riyaz, and hello to everyone. Thank you for checking in. So I'm actually in Cape Cod at the moment. I'm away from the studio, but this picture is where the studio is. It's in the Dumbo district of Brooklyn, New York, and that's the Manhattan Bridge. And down below is this space. I've actually been in New York since 2002, and in this space probably for about 8 or 9 years now. There's obviously a lot going on, and a lot of the work that I produce with Riyaz and with other artists and artisans goes on here. So that's me in New York. And Riyaz, can you say something about where this is?
And this is Ramganj Bazaar, in the center of city of Jaipur. This is actually Muslim neighborhood, where you can see mostly artisans like dyers, shoes makers with the embroidery, and jewelers. You can see these professional people there.
Right. And here, where are we now?
It's in my neighborhood, next to my house.
Yeah, yeah. So this is from the roof of your house, right? Yeah. And this is also
in my neighborhood.
And now where are we?
This is my living room.
That's nice. So your studio is at home, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
This is one of my assistant.
That's one of your assistants,
yeah.
Right. Right. So you have a number of assistants, and this is Nahid.
Nahid, Naz, and Samina.
Right. Okay, and this is the actual studio itself, right?
Oh, looks lovely.
This is one of my favorite places where I like to do work.
Yeah, we've spent
with the natural light.
We've spent many hours there together.
Yeah. So the light falls exactly on your work.
Yeah.
All right, so that gives you a little bit of context of where we are.
Yeah, lovely to see that actually, see both of you in your spaces. So Alex, why don't you walk us through the presentation you've put together? So that will give our audiences a little background about how you came to work with the whole miniature tradition. And if you could take us through some of the work you've produced with Riyaz over the last 25 years.
Okay, I'll be very happy to do that. Let me get there. All right, so are you seeing the screen to a number of figures on screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I kind of think of this as a bit of a portrait between Riyaz and me. You know, I'll let you guess which is which. And this is a photograph that was taken recently. You know, Riyaz and I have been working together for 25 years now. So you kind of get a feeling of us aging together more or less gracefully. So this is how I came about to working with Riyaz. I'd actually been working with a number of different artisans and craftspeople, mainly in Pakistan and in India. So these were actually two, you know, there's a spectacle maker on the left and a shoe repairer on the right, or shoemaker. Actually, it was a family of shoemakers in Delhi. And I would kind of have these drawings that would be interpreted them or made by them based on kind of fairly kind of clear instructions. So I'd been working with a number of different artisans and artists. And then I became really interested in working with Indian miniature painting. You know, kind of like many people, I was really kind of fascinated by the process, you know, and also just kind of the delicacy of the artwork, the colors, the stone colors and so on. And what I kind of was interested in doing was finding a way of kind of extracting various elements of painting. So a lot of the current work in Jaipur and Udaipur, it's quite traditional in the sense that they're copying old paintings. And I was just kind of really interested in taking different parts of a painting and working on that. So this is an example of that, where most of the details have been removed. So it becomes slightly more kind of minimal. Mm-hmm. I was very lucky to meet Riyaz. He was, I could think, in his early 20s. This was in 1996. I was introduced to him by some friends of my mother who'd actually done some work with Riyaz. And this is in the same neighborhood that he was describing earlier on. This is Ramganj Bazaar. So this is before he moved into the studio at home.
Mm-hmm. My gosh, how time flies.
Yes, it really does. It really does. Yeah. So Riyaz was basically using the same kind of techniques and traditions as you know, that have been used for really kind of hundreds of years. These are the brushes. That's the one on the left is the fabled single hair tip brush. And you know, even then, Riyaz's mastery was very, very clear. Mm-hmm. So I talked to him about us working together. I had some ideas, and he was, you know, a little bit dubious. He wanted to understand more about what it was all about. And then I got commissioned by Crabtree and Evelyn to do some package design for them, or some illustrations for packaging. Mm-hmm. So these were based, there you'll see the kind of the illustrations I came up with, and they were based on certain suggestions that they had for some of their perfumes and soaps and so on. And this job really kind of got us going because it was very well paid. Riyaz was very well paid. And I think it kind of really helped establish our relationship. And I was really moving between kind of looking at the traditional work, but then again, kind of abstracting it or bringing in a new visual language to it. So if you look at the elephant's legs, they've been modified into a kind of a bit of a homage to Bryce Marden. Again, the same principle. So part of this painting, this is one of Riyaz's paintings. So Riyaz at that time was really copying and copying and copying for the tourist market. And I really wanted to kind of take elements like around here or here and bring them into a new imagery. So I think this one was called Lunch Meat on My Pantsuit. It was kind of, I was quite interested, having recently moved to America, I was quite interested in language and terminology that I wasn't familiar with. This is a similar idea. You know, I was kind of really interested in, I mean, probably overly fixated by bolster cushions at that time. So I was looking at traditional paintings and, you know, love scenes, court scenes, and kind of imagining what the bolster cushions would get up to in their own time, you know, when the characters moved out. So again, all of this is using the same brushwork, the same technique, but kind of applied to a different language. And then often it would relate to some of my sculptures, like this knitted aeroplane on the right. So even when the work would drift back to much more kind of figurative elements, there was, you know, there were always kind of elements, you know, surprises, I suppose. Again, bolster cushions are here again, being quite animated. And then there's an element from a European botanical. There's an elephant trunk that's been kind of turned into a zebra. This gives you kind of a, you know, say a little bit about the way the process works. So essentially, I come up with the iconography and the imagery, the layout and the colors. So this one actually started a long time ago. If you just look at the background and the floor, it's essentially a kind of a Nadwara painting, the background of a Nadwara painting. And then I kind of dotted that with different narrative elements, and you know, I'd send that back to Riyaz, having had the background for a while, and then he would add certain elements. It could have just, I think it was the tree and the man looking through the window, and possibly this boat, and then it came back to me, and then I would add different elements. I work a lot with the computer. I make notes, color adjustments. That gets sent back to Riyaz. He will add new elements. So when I say things take, you know, they can take 2 to 4 years, it's not because they're being worked on that whole time, but that's really from start to finish.
Gosh, that looks like Noah's Ark.
That does look like Noah's Ark, yeah. You know, and again, some of these images really kind of are rooted more in my kind of iconography or photography. But then it could move back to much more minimal imagery. Riyaz and I are both pretty obsessed by old paper. You know, I describe ourselves as paper fetishists, so we'll collect paper and work on it, but we get really, really kind of obsessed by the paper, and it becomes a kind of a very active part of the artwork. This is the man we would go to find paper. Chacha, who is also incredibly talented. I mean, he can split a piece of paper in two, you know, just if it was, you know, 2-ply paper, he could literally split it apart. And he became a significant part of our work just because he supplied this, you know, some of the paper was about 200 years old. And then I'd be referring back to either kind of American kind of modern sculpture. This is a David Smith sculpture, and that's my interpretation of it. And this paper is from, I think, probably from about the 1920s. Sometimes I'd be referring back to my old sculptures that I'd done years before. And again, it's kind of, Riyaz would fill in with these patterns that could be from a Japanese kimono, or it could be from Islamic tile work, it could be from a Mughal miniature painting, it could be designs that, you know, I'd come up with at some point. So it's really kind of mixing in different layers of histories and geography. Some of you might recognize this as Gilbert and George, the English kind of performance artists, turned into topiary and superimposed onto the Union Jack. But the Union Jack kind of, if you think about how Britain came to be, it's actually made up of a lot of kind of Indian and Islamic patterns, kind of from Jali work and so on. Animals would come up a lot, and this is kind of references again to the Jura print on the right that again Riyaz painted almost kind of with the same degree of detail as the original. And on the left, it's on a book plate of a painting by George Stubbs. And here, really what I would do is kind of indicate where the Mughal horse would be painted on top. I have nothing really to say about this, but it's just an example. The patterns in Indian miniature paintings are really kind of phenomenal, and I became very, very kind of obsessed by patterns. So the pattern on the horse has really kind of got into a lot of other paintings over time. And Riyaz, because he has a history of working with, I mean, he'll tell you a little bit about this, but his father was a restorer, and he really kind of has the ability to match colors and match patterns with an incredible kind of accuracy. And then the work would then take on another turn, and this kind of relates to some of my handmade sculptures, quite small sculptures that would be applied with different patterns. And this was actually on found paper.
Oh.
That in turn would be made into an object, and in this case, I also work with a wood carver called Bavar, who's also in Jaipur. So he carved this out, and then I instructed where the patterns would go. So there've been a lot of objects that have been painted. This was from a recent show at Gallery Arc in Baroda. Hammers painted with patterns, zebra and cheetah patterns. And again, same process. So working on 3 dimensions became another aspect of the work we did. And, you know, I wasn't sure whether Riyaz could do it, but he generally finds a way. So these are our bolster cushions back again. Working on book plates and vintage photography became quite a big part over the years. And on the right, it's the artist Francis Bacon. On the left is John Paul Getty. So you'll see there's a lot of gold in this, and this is real gold. Riyaz lives in the Gold Beaters neighborhood, and there are literally thousands of gold beaters there. So we collect gold, we buy gold from them, and then it's ground down into a powder, and that appears in a lot of the artwork.
Oh.
So this is on one of the vintage photographs. And again, you know, vintage photography, when it was, or black and white photography, used to be hand tinted. So Riyaz also learned the technique of hand tinting photographs. So you'll see there's just a little bit of color added. It's a very kind of translucent color that's been added to the faces that would otherwise be probably more like this here, this part of the leg. So he just kind of adds a little bit of life, and then in other parts of it, it's much more opaque. And again, might feature kind of elements of my designs or figures that I've kind of lifted from historical paintings. I'm really kind of constantly taking, you know, borrowing imagery from all sorts of sources.
Yeah. You can see people from outside the frame wandering in.
I think this was a group of Europeans in a group photographs. You'll see the kind of, you know, could be the landowners who had their portrait painted, and then I will overpaint. I'll have, you know, I'll work over some of them. So this is from a Renaissance painting. And even when we're using Indian miniature imagery, it might relate to kind of Safavid paintings, Persian paintings, Turkish Indian miniature paintings, Rajput paintings, it could be Pahari. So it's really kind of a combination of very, very different traditions. So after we had been working for a long time together, Riyaz and I was kind of really wanting to explore the idea of taking the miniature out of the frame. You know, so we still have some of the images that you'll have seen earlier, but in this case, it's been turned into wallpapers. This was from a show many, many years ago, Van Doren Waxter at the Armory Fair in New York. And then just kind of, we created an environment, an installation that was so kind of rich in patterns, but it also included some of the paintings. This is another installation at Van Doren Waxter in their gallery. And this is another wallpaper. So if you see these lines, they're basically, the outlines of a traditional Indian miniature paintings, which is, again, one of the elements that I became really fascinated by, and decided to kind of create a wallpaper based on that. And then, I spent quite a lot of time drawing blobs. So they became kind of integrated into that. And then the artworks themselves. I mean, weirdly, it was kind of quite hard to look at. It was kind of an immersive environment. So this is Martin Kudlek, a gallery I've worked with for many, many years in Germany, and he did an art fair in Brussels, I believe. Carpets also developed. So this was actually my first show in India with Javeri Contemporary, and I was very excited to work in India. I'd kind of resisted the idea for quite a long time, and then I spoke to Priya Javeri, and it was kind of it was quite a momentous thing for me, being able to show the work in India. The carpets were a big part of that, so you'll see that carpet was based on this drawing.
Oh. So this was in 2012, right? Your first show in India.
Yeah, I've got a terrible sense of timing, but if you say so, then that's when it was. That sounds about right. Yeah. This is another carpet painted. This was for a fairly recent exhibition at the Gruen Gallery in San Francisco. So even though Riyaz had no direct involvement in the carpet, the imagery from which it's derived, as in this one, is completely based on the studio, and he's kind of developed an ability to translate my drawings in a very, very kind of interesting way. So we have different names for different types of shading depending on how kind of detailed it needs to be and whether it's going to be overpainted. We have different wave patterns, different leaf patterns, and then all the colors. We have kind of codes that I would kind of send to Riyaz, and that was the same in this case. And then it turned into a carpet, and I've been very lucky to work with Jaipur rugs in Jaipur, who make these phenomenal carpets, and this is another one of them. I was invited to produce a watch for Swatch in Switzerland, and this was really based on some of the Jali work that I became kind of really interested in. And this is one of the artists in the studio, Papu, who's really a phenomenal painter of geometric patterns. So this whole piece is painted freehand. He'll just do lines. He'll do the horizontal lines in the pattern, and then the vertical lines in the patterns, and then he'll do the diagonals until it builds up. And it's really it's quite an incredible thing to watch. So this is the swatch, and then it's box. So the box I designed based on one of the paintings that we'd produced. So this is Riyaz with his assistant, and the way she is looking at the brush is basically the way I watch Riyaz when he paints. Just kind of the level of detail and concentration and fascination. I mean that really could be me watching him. And sometimes when he paints outlines, they might be like 1 or 2 millimeters apart from each other, and he'll use a ruler, but it's with such incredible concentration. So he actually stops breathing just for the length of time to draw. So one of these outlines here. So that's how pattern will be created, freehand. And then this is going back to the slightly more kind of narrative-based imagery, but of course it brings in kind of new elements from a kind of a Fra Angelico fresco to a drawing of a seal, or so again it kind of really mixes up different visual languages and different histories. And then sometimes we go back into kind of more of the kind of almost kind of notational drawings where I'm kind of placing sketches and elements on different places around the image. And I think, again, this has gone back and forth for a very, very long time. I mean, this character here was right at the end, and then the booties, which is a type of pattern on textiles, that also came right at the end. So they're kind of, and you know, they're really kind of like conversations between Riyaz and I. And that's it. This is the last image of the presentation. This is Riyaz and I, photographed in Jaipur. And I hope that kind of gives a bit of an outline of the way in which we've worked, but hopefully some of it will be covered also in, you know, in the talk to come.
Yeah, it was quite wonderful to see that journey that you'll have taken together over so many years. Both of you young in those photographs and then moving through the years. Lovely.
Yeah, it really feels like we have kind of grown up together, and that's been a very big part of the whole project.
Mm-hmm. So Alex, this work includes really a whole range of references. You know, there are different geographies, there are different time frames that are all collapsed together in this is one scenario. And you've had a history of working with artists and artisans from Central Asia, from different parts coming up. There's Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. How did that actually come about?
Well, my mother, you know, my mum was a textile dealer and a collector, and she's been traveling to Afghanistan, mainly to Afghanistan, Central Asia and India, really since I was a kid. And at certain times I was kind of lucky enough to travel with her. So I grew up being surrounded by Central Asian textiles, ikats, lakai textiles, Uzbek embroideries. And I think, you know, that's just kind of really fed into my work. So when I was 15, we went on a long trip through Soviet Central Asia and into Afghanistan. And I really kind of, I think that was when I first started noticing the way people work, how they organize their workspace, and the kind of dexterity people have with their hands. Sometimes even with their feet, when the way they work. So that really kind of fed into it. And yeah, in terms of the imagery, you know, I'll just really I'm kind of a bit of a magpie. I pick from all sorts of different sources.
And what about the artisans that you seem to have worked with? I mean, did that as well, was that because of your travels and you saw the different kinds of work that people did and the exquisite technique that they brought to their craft? Yeah,
you know, I think when I remember in Delhi walking past a shoemaker, and in that time, you know, shoes were being made by hand, and then this is before, I mean, now I think it's even hard to find even in India, which is such a pity. But I spent a lot of time working, sitting in this shoemaker shop and just watching this incredible ability to, you know, to control material, you know, and then I actually had a drawing of a shoe that split off into two for some reason, and I asked him if he thought he could produce that, and he made it. You know, and I think he was quite challenged by the idea of making something completely different. And the same with the spectacle maker, and I've worked with sari embroiderers, giving them drawings to interpret. So once you do something with someone, you kind of realize there's a whole new range of possibilities.
Yeah, indeed. And you spoke of your mother, you know, as a dealer in textiles and whatnot. And I've read that Riyaz's father was also a dealer in antiques and in miniatures. And I wonder if that had an equal influence on the profession that he chose. Riyaz bhai, maaf kijiye, mera Hindi अच्छा नहीं है. अगर आप हिंदी या इंग्लिश में बात कीजिए जो आपको ठीक लगता है. अगर आप हिंदी में करना है तो मैं ट्रांसलेट करने की कोशिश करती हूँ. तो वही मुझे पूछना था कि did your father's profession have an influence on what you chose to do?
Can you repeat your question again? Sorry.
Riyaz, can I just?
आपका पिताजी एक एंटीक डीलर था
miniatures में. Sure that you're seeing this. Are you seeing the screen now with Riyaz's father? Yeah, you are. Okay. So Riyaz, how did you get into making Indian miniature paintings. Where did because your family didn't make paintings for many generations, right?
No, my father actually, he started to make the copies in 1960s or 65. He started his own studio with a very well-known artist. We know Bannu, Vedpal Bannu.
Bannu,
And
okay.
he trained him as a restaurator. Because in 1970s, when the government make in the emergency, they declare you can't sell your old paintings to tourists, and you can't export to them. Then that time my father, he started to make the replicas of old paintings. So they are the founder, or you can say they invent to make the copies for tourist market. So same time he turned to that guy, Bannu. So when Bannu, he get very successful artist, Mrs. Kennedy, he wrote a book about him, Second Paradise. Bannu pricing and clients are very, very rich client he got. So
it's Jackie Kennedy, right? The wife of
Jacqueline
Kennedy. Yeah.
So he started to ignore my father because as a groom, he can't charge too much from my father. So he started to ignore him. So then my father started to paint himself in the age of 45. So
that's really amazing to have someone.
So he was the first artist in my generation, my father. And because when I was very young, I got diarrhea by some food poisoning or like this. So my father was always look to me every time. He liked to keep always with him. So when he was doing painting, I was very impressed by that. So he trained me. He also trained me.
From the age of 15?
In the age of 15. I started to paint in the age of 12 by coal on the wall, by chalk on the wall. So he said, I'm very interested in that. So he started to teach me. But he don't want to train me as a commercial miniature artist, because he want to train me as a restorator of Indian miniature paintings.
Okay.
So that's why we studied all kinds of schools, like Indian miniature paintings have always changed in 100 kilometer hours. You can see Jaipur, and they have their own style. Kishangarh, they have their own style. And Byawar, they have their own style. Jodhpur. So in every 100 kilometers, you can see the changes of the style of the paintings. And my father was very expert to recognize. Sometimes these things I heard from the dealers, antique dealers. There's sometimes National Museum also called my father to recognize this paint, which schools belong to these paintings, and he was very expert in that. So he trained me in Indian miniatures. So we have experience of all kinds of schools.
Okay, that's wonderful. You know, what I was thinking was this pandemic would have provided the ideal environment for such a collaboration to develop. But this happened 25 years ago, and I would really like to hear more about the process. How did you manage to work through this collaboration without the aid of WhatsApp and FaceTime and Zoom?
Yeah, that was very difficult at first.
Very difficult. That time, he always texted me by numbers. So it was really very hard to.
Yeah, in many ways, I'm quite glad that we were able to start before computer technology really took over, because it meant that we really kind of developed a language together that was quite personal to us. And I think, you know, when I met Riyaz, at first he kind of, you know, he wanted to get a sense of who I was and what this kind of strange person wanted, but we became friends very, very quickly, and we kind of, I think we've had this sense of respect for each other, so that over time, as the technology developed, it became a lot easier. At that time, I would come over to India and I'd spend much longer working there. It was before I had a family and so on. So we were really kind of sitting side by side for a long time. But then we also, we're very good friends with the courier company, and they're sending packages back and forth. So I think, this, because we have a kind of, we built up a language together, and Riyaz now has an ability really to kind of, I won't say mind read, but I think he really has a sense of what I'm kind of interested in. So the instructions now are kind of less specific than they used to be, but it is still quite an important part of it. I think it's fair to say that Riyaz, you really want to focus on the technique and on being an absolute, having this real mastery of the brush, and matching colors and so on. Whereas for me, being able to kind of dream up imagery and kind of create a kind of the language, that's really kind of my passion. So it kind of works out quite well in that way too.
So you would actually be sending these things back and forth between each other by post or courier, or what would you do?
Absolutely, yeah. We have a lot of it would be going back and forth. The same piece of work would go back and forth maybe 6 or 7 times. Not on its own. Would have we're working on lots of different projects together, and because the studio's grown, there are now 6 or 7 other artists working in the studio. So it's really kind of kept a lot of people fairly busy, and there's so much kind of imagery going on. So in my studio, I'm often working on 9 or 10 pieces at the same time. So one element will kind of be transposed onto another, and then I'm using a color, and that will start off another piece, and that will lead on to another kind of paper. So it's quite kind of organic. And then when Riyaz gets it, he'll kind of go through, the images and instructions. But now we also have this amazing thing called WhatsApp, and that makes things a lot easier as well.
Okay, so multiple things happening at the same time, multiple works happening at the same time, and each sort of feeding off the other. Yeah,
it's really kind of
okay. I don't really believe in originality. That's a comment of yours that I came across. So what were you really referring to? And does this kind of link into the whole question of authorship and labor and outsourcing? Well, for example, while Riyaz is credited in the work that you do together, it does appear under your name, Alex. So how have you come to that arrangement?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's really evolved over a long period of time. To an extent, it's partly practical. In the sense of when we started working with Riyaz, I think what was important for you, Riyaz, was having some kind of sense of security, that the work he was producing would have a home, because if it didn't go to me, it couldn't go elsewhere. So we kind of made a decision that, and this is partly economic, was that Riyaz basically gets paid for everything he produces, certainly for me, but actually other work he does too. So he's really certainly all the work he does for me, everything is essentially paid for. So I think in a way there's this practical decision for Riyaz not to deal with the risk that I have to deal with. So that's one side of it. The other part was that the galleries kind of found it a little bit kind of confusing to kind of, not knowing Riyaz, but also because I'm working with a number of different artists in the studio, it could be that Riyaz will do one small part of it, and then, Papu or Rizwan will work on another part, or Nahid, one of the other artists. So that's the other part. But I think also I feel very connected to the images in terms of the way they've been created and established, in a way that I think, because Riyaz has got such extraordinary skill, that I think his focus is really to do with producing to a set of instructions. And I think the connection that he has with each piece is quite different. So, that's a kind of kind of slightly convoluted answer to it, but it's something that Riyaz and I and Riyaz, what do you think about it, about your name on the work, and how do you feel about that?
I'm very excited about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about your name being, so if there's an exhibition, it's under my name and not on your name. What do you think about that?
I never thought about that.
Right.
अच्छा, आपको ये चीज इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं है आपके लिए? ये चीज, this is not important for you, whether it comes under your name or not?
No, it's nothing serious.
No.
It's okay.
Okay.
I think actually what's interesting is that when Riyaz was painting, the tradition of the atelier is that there will be a number of different people working on a single image, and often, I mean, more often than not, the works are not signed. So going back to this idea of originality, when you see a work of mine, it incorporates elements, it could be Dürer, it could be, Masaccio, it could be, Hergé, so, the artist who invented Tintin, so, and that's why I don't really think about originality, because I think it kind of, particularly in the West, we make so much of it, but there's very little that's really original, and I'm kind of probably more interested in making connections.
Yeah, and you're right about the ateliers, that each person was a specialist in a certain thing, and it would be the expertise of various people that would come together to create that work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially, the way it works is that on the back of each piece is my name and Riyaz's name and my signature. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the title of this evening's conversation is Art and Friendship. And I do know that it's a very important of this collaboration, as you've told me. So would you like to talk a little about this? What has the collaboration meant to you, not just on a professional, but a personal level? And has that relationship sort of elevated the quality of the output?
Yeah, I think I've actually got some more photos I'm going to show you. I'll show you those. So yeah, this is a guy I've been working with for a long time, and the artwork is obviously kind of at the root of everything we do, but the friendship has become just a really astonishing part of it for me. It's just in terms of kind of how enriching it is. I've been kind of accepted in the household now for many years, and now I stay with Riyaz in the old city when I'm there. And what I find about him is, Riyaz has gone through some pretty kind of hardships in his earlier life. Some of which I've witnessed, and his ability to go through things with incredible kind of grace and good humor has been something that I've really kind of learned from and kind of appreciated over the years. So this was at the most recent exhibition that we had in Baroda in art, and it was just such a, it was lovely to be there with him with that. And Riyaz has actually been able to, I've invited him a couple of times to America, and we've been to an exhibition that we did at the Crow Collection together, and he's visited my, where I used to live in England, visited my mum. So I think the kind of the family connection has been a big part of it. This is a very small part of the family. This is going out for dinner. And Riyaz lives with three brothers and their family. So it's really kind of an extended family network. And there's always something happening in the household. It could be this. So that was actually the milkman who came to visit. He comes every morning, and he's not like a normal milkman. You know, he'll just kind of, he shouts at everyone. He kind of will give massages to Riyaz, and he'll try and do deals, and he'll talk about his water buffaloes and his rose business. There's always something going on. This is literally outside of Riyaz's window. Riyaz, was this a wedding? Riyaz?
Yeah.
Was this a wedding going on?
Yeah, this is a wedding.
Yeah, of your neighbors, right?
Yeah, my neighbors.
Yeah, so there's just so much that's going on, and I think kind of the depth of, for me, of kind of really being enriched by the friendship with Riyaz is something that's actually kind of very hard. It's kind of quite hard to describe. This is Riyaz's sister-in-law and his young son Faraz. He's now grown up a lot. You know, so I think just in terms of hanging out together, it's been a really, really important part. And also just kind of the number of people Riyaz has introduced me to, of people I work with now, whether they're Bava, the stone carver, or you know, I work with sand carters and so on. And Riyaz is often kind of arranging that and organizing all sorts of things. So it's really kind of has given me so much over the years.
Riyaz bhai, what do you feel about this friendship with Alex and the work that you have produced because of it? How has it changed the way you work?
Yeah, because when he I never did Persian patterns in my paintings, so he gave the opportunities to do that. Like we did lots of Japanese patterns. So these are things always excitement for me. So enjoying, enjoying.
Okay. Alex, you're quite a prolific artist, over 15 solo shows. You've been part of several exhibitions, including in India. And I think this is the one that you're talking about, the exhibition that you showed us was the one at Arc in Baroda. So would you like to talk about what you've been working on recently? Because I've seen some fascinating images of furniture and sculptures, you know, different from the works on paper.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I'll actually show you some more images of that. You know, it's funny because when you think about collaboration, I think this side of working with galleries is also a kind of a collaborative process. You know, and I've been very, very fortunate to work with some really wonderful galleries, and most recently was Gallery Arc in Baroda. Quite a new gallery, was kind of really off the beaten track in terms of the art scene in India, and just a wonderful group of people there who gave me an opportunity to experiment and to try different things out. So this was the last show. It's called Otherworldly Interiors, and it was based on, you know, it's kind of a play on the magazine, The World of Interiors. And I was kind of trying to create this other world, I suppose, that was, you know, quite a kind of, you know, it had this kind of Alice in Wonderland quality. And the gallery was kind of willing to, you know, to try things out that probably, you know, wouldn't have a market, but they wanted to see them. And they had all these ideas that I was able to work on. So this was a table set with hand-painted cutlery. All the chairs were painted by Riyaz and his staff. He called in some furniture painters. It was a really kind of quite a kind of manic project to work on. We decided, you know, we realized it might be possible to paint directly onto shoes. This was the first pair, and, you know, we're going to be doing some more. We've painted directly onto ties and onto, you know, we printed napkins. And then again, you know, the other worlds were, you know, this was an actual globe that Riyaz painted on with a couple of his assistants. So that was a really kind of exciting thing to work on. And it spurned on so many kind of new ideas. And this is something that often happens as you work on one project and that leads onto another. So at the moment, I'm working on quite a big commission for the Humboldt Forum, which is a museum in Berlin that's going to be opening, COVID permitting, kind of later, well, next year. And this is actually it's a 30-foot long video projection that I'm working on with my friend and collaborator in kind of all things video, Richard Coleman. So we're working on that. And of course, I have a project with MAP, working on your collection of photographs. So that's also something that's really nice that, you know, Riyaz and I are kind of really focusing on that now quite intensively. You know, so I've been kind of looking through the archive. I came to Bangalore, which is where we first met. And, you know, so that's really kind of what I'm working on now. And yeah, and there are always kind of other projects going on.
Okay, so I think it's time for us very quickly to take questions, Alex. So I'll read out some to you that have been coming in. This is Aisha Bulchandani, and she says, thank you, Alexander and Riyaz, for illuminating your creative process. I've enjoyed Bryce Marden's work at museums in USA and in private art collections over the years living in New York. In addition, being exposed to miniature paintings growing up in India, I am curious, what is it that inspired you and Riyaz to bring Marden and miniature paintings together in some of your works?
I probably should answer that because I think Riyaz hasn't really been exposed to that much, certainly contemporary and modern Western art. Like you, I've kind of loved Bryce Marden's work. There's a kind of a slightly tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, you know, of just kind of thinking of these luminaries in the art world and actually repainting them in a very, very different technique. So I think the first work we did, Riyaz and I did together, was actually an Agnes Martin painting, you know, which was very, very minimal. And all I was focusing on then was having Riyaz paint this very, very kind of fine grid. And on that, we imposed some of these turbans and hookah pipes. So I think the answer to that is really to do with combining different languages and seeing what happens. And, you know, when I was saying that I don't really believe in originality, I don't think anything is really new, but what I'm kind of interested in is connections. You know, so relating a Bryce Marden to an Indian miniature painting and using the same stone colors and natural pigments, using a miniature brush with something, you know, Bryce Marden uses, you know, he's known for using these 4-foot long brushes that he'll wield almost like a sword. So it's really about kind of taking different traditions, upending them a little bit, and then coming up with something new.
Okay, so Seema Balla has a question for Riyaz Bhai. Riyaz Bhai, Seema ji wants to know, have you trained in any specific style of Indian miniature paintings?
To whom?
And also, did your father paint in the style of Banuji?
Yeah, he mostly liked to paint the animals and the portrait of Kishangarh Panitani. That was a very favorite subject of my father. He always liked to paint the harbust ladies and raginis, like the girls are playing with the animals, parrots, and these kinds of things my father liked to paint.
Okay.
Me also, before to Alexander, I like to paint the Mughal portrait. That is my favorite because Mughals have too much detail, Mughal paintings. I like to do the detailing work. So that was my favorite subjects. But when I start with Alexander, that was also very exciting for me because I never did. Mostly in Indian miniature painters, which you can see in this period, they have some particular style. Like guys who are starting to paint elephant, whole life he will paint only elephants. That is a bad, what we said, sorry, my English is not good. So, वो एक दायरे में बन जाता है कि उसको वो जो स्टूडियो होते हैं जो भी Indian miniature painting है, they always tend to their artists in one style. But when we start with Alexander, he gave us lots of opportunities to do the paintings on sculptures, paintings on wood, paintings on ceramics. That is a very big opportunities for us to learn the different techniques.
Okay.
And
also, I kind of with the assistants, they would often be doing one type of work, and we decided it would be really good for them to learn different types of work, because otherwise it's kind of boring. So they've become a lot more versatile. But just going back to the question about Banu, Riyaz's father actually taught Banu, he was actually Banu's teacher. Banu then kind of went on his own way once he made these connections with various kind of collectors. But then he developed his own style, which was kind of rooted in Kishangar painting. But Riyaz, your father didn't paint in the same style as Banu.
No, he always do same like in traditional. Banu, he developed his different style of Kishangar. But my father liked to do in same like in the traditional of Kishangar style.
Kishangar, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question from Sachdev Ramakrishna, where he says, this art partnership reminds me of great cross-border partnerships in other arts, for example, Pandit Ravi Shankar and George Harrison. So how did Alexander discover Riyaz?
I had been working with a number of artists, and often, mainly, like I said, in Peshawar, and I'd often be introduced to them by friends or, people I knew. I'd be looking for knitters, and someone knew there was an Afghan group of knitters. So in Delhi, I would meet people really kind of in the street. You could walk into places. And then when I got to Jaipur, I really had this idea, the project had developed in my mind, but it was really a matter of finding the right person. And I spoke to one fellow, and he had no idea what I was talking about. And it was a kind of interesting, kind of looking for someone who was old enough to have the technique, or was accomplished enough to have the technique, but was young enough to be willing to change his mind. And my mum had these friends, 2 Italian friends who were living in Jaipur at the time, and she put me in touch with them. And they had actually worked with Riyaz doing, a set of tarot cards. And they very, very graciously said, they introduced us. And it was kind of interesting, because it was all the kind of the technical aspects, but then the human side of it as well. We just kind of really connected very early on. So it was really an introduction through a friend. That's the short answer.
Okay, so given that the work takes between 2 and 3 years to finish, this question says, how do you both retain the focus and the excitement to take it to the finish, given the distance and the time that these things take?
Riyaz, how do you keep focused on the work? How do you not get distracted by so many different things? When you're working, what do you think about when you're painting?
Your work?
Yeah.
Your work or my work?
Both together.
On your pieces.
Either. On the work that we're doing together.
Actually, I didn't understand what you want to ask.
Okay, I will ask the question again. It says that it takes so long. बहुत time लगता है इसको बनने में, 2-3 साल लगता है. So how do you keep focused on the work? Because 2-3 महीने के बाद आप bored नहीं हो जाते? ये excitement, ये focus कैसे रखते हैं?
Because when I was thinking, now I complete the painting. When I sent back to him, again he sent back with a new composition to that, and that also very, very nice. Very nice, very creative things. So I never bored with his work.
I think the other part of it is that we really are working on a whole group of pieces together. So, and Riyaz has assistants. So it's actually quite a dynamic it's quite a kind of active situation in the studio, and there's always something to do. And then the works will go, a work might go through 4 different people's hands. Someone might be doing the border, someone is kind of blocking in the color. Riyaz will do the fine detailed work. So I think that also keeps it more interesting. And for me, I kind of feel like my head's on fire sometimes, so that you can't be bored when your head's on fire.
Yeah. Well, we're at 7, so I think we just squeeze in one last question before we end, which is from Vaspo X Vaspo.
Hi, Vaspo.
Hi, and nice to have you listening in.
I should say, actually, before the question, that Waswo is another, I hope everyone knows, is a very gifted artist who lives in Udaipur. But he's also incredibly generous, and he kind of organized an exhibition of miniature paintings that introduced me to Nupur and the family arc. So it's very nice that the conversation will end with a question from him.
Yeah, that's why I felt we must fit this in. He asks, Alexander, were you influenced by Francesco Clemente or any other artists that preceded you in collaboration with artists in Asia, or strong influences from European artists? Weirdly, I knew of Clemente's work, but not about the work that he did with the kind of the erotic subjects. So I was kind of tangentially aware of him. I'm influenced by everything, really. It could be, it's very broad. So I think the artist who, in respect to kind of the way I'm working, who was much more influential was Alighieri Boetti, who actually lived in Afghanistan for a while in Kabul, and he had a hotel called the One Hotel. And I find him absolutely fascinating. If you don't know him, it's really worth looking into Boetti. So, and I think there was this kind of playful element, and he was very, very explicit about his working relationship. He did embroideries with a group of Afghan women, and he wove carpets together. And it was a very, and philosophically it was very interesting. So the answer to that question is probably Boetti was the most influential, set that method of working up for me. But yeah, in terms of, there are lots of artists who work collaboratively in different ways. Okay, so we're at the end of time. So I would like to say thank you very much to Riyaz Uddin Bhai and Alexander Gorlizki. Thank you so much for making the time to share your thoughts and your work with us. And this kind of a collaboration over the 7 seas is just so inspirational for so many of us who feel that it's important to come together to create something beautiful. So thank you both for joining us. And thank you, our audience, for listening in. And stay tuned. We have many more talks coming up. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Kamini. It's really been such a pleasure to be able to talk to you. And I'm so excited to be able to work with you at MAP on this project. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening in.
We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Good night.